In this episode, I talked to Amanda Moore about living with a chronic illness, what to ask, what not to ask, and what is inspiration porn. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to have difficult conversations, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Amanda, you and I met each other in, was it 2015, 16, somewhere around there?
Yeah, something like that.
When I joined the board of Koinonia Farm. And I don't want to talk just about Koinonia, but I feel like it's an important sort of context and background to probably your story, and will come up at some point. So I pulled this small sentence from the website that says, Koinonia Farm was founded in 1942 by Clarence and Florence Jordan and Martin and Mabel England as a demonstration plot for the kingdom of God, which is good. I mean, it's a pretty good summary.
Yeah, it is.
I highly recommend, before I joined the board of Koinonia, I watched Briars in the Cotton Patch with my kids because they were wondering where in the world I was flying off to. And that's a great introduction to Koinonia Farm. But I don't know if you want to give the 5-minute history of Koinonia Farm.
Sure.
Or what's so interesting about a lot of I'm always surprised people that have kind of heard of it, but most of the time people don't know very much about it.
Right. Well, the thing that people most know Koinonia for is that we are the place that started Habitat for Humanity. Back in the mid to late 60s and 70s, we were doing some housing ministry and partnership ministries that included like small micro lending programs as well as farming programs. And the house building was one part of that, and that turned into Habitat for Humanity. So a lot of folks know us for that. Koinonia is also really well known as a forerunner to the civil rights movement. So in the 40s when we started, we had both Black and white people working together, sharing meals together, fellowshipping. Eventually, we actually had Black people move on to the farm campus and share housing with the white folks who were living here. And of course, in the 40s in the Jim Crow South, that was quite a big deal. So in the mid-50s, that's when Brown versus Board of Education passed, and immediately after that, started a local backlash against Koinonia. We had actually enjoyed really good relationships locally until that happened, but then a violent campaign was started to try to get Koinonia to leave town, and an economic boycott that crippled the farm. We had up to 1,400 acres of land. We were farming most all of that, and suddenly overnight we couldn't farm anymore. We had chickens we had to slaughter and sell other places in the state. We had seeds we couldn't plant because nobody would sell us what we needed to get that in the ground. And of course, harvesting wasn't even an option. And so things really changed after that economic boycott financially crippled the community. That's when we started our mail order business. We sell pecans and chocolate. In the beginning, we were selling hickory smoked hams, but unfortunately, the white people up north didn't know what to do with this moldy ham that was sent to them. So they would call us and say, hey, you sent us a moldy ham. And we're like, yeah, isn't it good? But they didn't understand how that worked. So that didn't last very long. And then the mail order business became a financial way to continue on here in Sumter County. Of course, our slogan for the mail order business was really creative, and we say it still is true today. Our slogan is, help us ship the nuts out of Georgia. products through the years, but it's our main way of connecting with new folks too. We work conferences and work as vendors, introducing new generations to the community, and of course, introducing them to the ministry style work we do too. We are a place of hospitality, and we have been since 1942. We have guest space here on campus for those who want to come and do a retreat or take one of our classes or even do an internship. We share meals with people from near and far, and that's always been really life-giving for our community.
Yeah.
And then we do some other local ministries too. The one that I've been most involved in the past 2 years is sort of a new venture, at least at this point in our history. So I say that I do work with disability advocacy, support, and research. And what that means is that I have created a network of both supporting and helping folks with disabilities get access to resources they need to improve their quality of life and also increase the longevity of their life if possible. So connecting them with practitioners and doctors, but also making information available to them and accessible to them. So like researching their condition, finding some treatments that may work for them, and just helping them really understand what is going on, because life with chronic debilitating conditions is really difficult. And if you don't have a mind for the terminology that goes along with the medicine side of it, it just complicates things even more. So that's something I've been doing the last 2 years, in part because of my own diagnosis with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And having to learn a lot of that myself, and for my sister and for my mom and my brother and my sister's 2 kids who all have this condition.
Wow.
So we've just had to learn for ourselves, because there isn't really a manual of how to live with a chronic debilitating condition.
Well, and when I came on to the farm, to the board of Koinonia, I remember it was before you had received a diagnosis. This podcast is a lot about learning how to have difficult conversations, and also learning about people who are different or things that are different than us, and how to talk about our differences. I distinctly remember when I joined the board, there was a lot of conflict going on, and you were really going through this difficult time, not having a diagnosis and having conflict with people not understanding what was going on with you.
Well, didn't understand what was going on with me. And so part of that conflict was internal. I was just forcing myself to go through the motions of being a healthy person, because there wasn't really an alternative. You know, it's not like you suddenly get to a point where you're like, I'm sick enough to be considered disabled. Mm-hmm. That's not really how that works. You know, it's more of a crisis has to happen to really get you to that point.
Yeah. Well, and that conflict was kind of what made me think of wanting to talk to you, because some of that conflict that was going on, even though you didn't have a diagnosis, but the difficulty was this lack of understanding or empathy or ability to kind of really cross over that divide between people who were not understanding what was going on, you weren't understanding what was going on, and trying to navigate that. And, you know, you are not alone. There are a lot of people. My mom actually had a diagnosis at one point of fibromyalgia, and I remember I didn't know much about fibromyalgia, but I knew she had chronic health issues and chronic pain, but I didn't really know, didn't know what to do or how to help her, or even, she was a nurse before her disability and not being able to work. And so she has lots of language to talk about it, but I probably, I feel like I probably really don't have a lot of language or ability to talk to her about it. So I thought it would be great to talk to you, and you can kind of tell us a little bit about your journey from not having that diagnosis and feeling like what the heck is going on with me, to finding that. And then I'm so excited to hear about the work that you're now doing with Koinonia to advocate and support people that are going through similar journeys.
Yeah. So I'll start with just sharing a little bit about my health. and then I'll share how it connected to sort of the conflict surrounding life and community with disability. Does that sound like it would be a good pathway to take?
Yeah, definitely. For those that don't know, Koinonia, maybe those that aren't in the circles that you and I are in, is also it's considered a Christian intentional community. So people are living together, have certain sort of commitments to each other.
Yeah.
You're living life with people, and that life in community has different dynamics.
Yeah, so it's like if you were to work and live and go to church with your coworkers. It's a very intense setting.
I can hear the gasps of people like, why would you do that right now?
Exactly. Well, the nice thing is that you do get to choose a little bit more so than a standard workplace, you know?
Yeah.
We're all drawn to this way of life, so that means we have certain things in common that are sort of above just what hobbies you like and where you like to vacation and that kind of thing. But yeah, so my own health history has been really crazy from the time I was young. In fact, all three of us, my two siblings and I, had really clear signs of Ehlers-Danlos even at birth. So if a doctor had known to look for that at that point, he or she would have been able to diagnose all three of us with Ehlers-Danlos even at birth. And then, of course, my mom would have been diagnosed because she had so many symptoms of it. And that was I was born in 85. And so no one was really talking much about it. Back then, connective tissue disorders were known. And Marfan disorder, which is a cousin of Ehlers-Danlos, was known, but that is a more rare and also more deadly connective tissue disorder. So I was 13, I think, when I was diagnosed with my first major condition, Hashimoto's disease, an autoimmune condition, and the immune system attacks the thyroid. For some reason, it sees it as an enemy. And so your immune system thinks part of your body is a virus or bacteria or something, you know, an enemy. And so it just attacks it. So I was diagnosed with that, and I had probably had it for a couple of years before diagnosis. But that is super early to be diagnosed with that condition. It's typically females who are much older than 13, you know, premenopause or perimenopause is when most people are diagnosed with that. So that started me on this chronic illness journey fairly early. And I also, as a kid, had so many of the same things many people with connective tissue disorders have. I had chronic pain. I had to go to the hospital so many times as a young girl because I kept having pain that my mom just couldn't figure out what was going on. I had a lot of chest pain when I was about 8 or 9. And I remember going to the hospital constantly, and doctors just kept saying, well, it's growing pains. And turns out it's not growing pains. My ribs were flexing and dislocating and so many other things that now make sense to me, but you know, as an 8, 9, 10-year-old, they don't make sense. And my mom said some of my earliest words were about pain. And so here you have this toddler, you know, who's in pain. And so, you know, I feel like the diagnosis itself was really an explanation for a lifelong condition. I mean, it obviously was an explanation for a lifelong condition, but really an explanation for a lifetime of unanswered questions or things swept under the rug and just normalized when they actually weren't normal. Mm-hmm. I hurt my knee in middle school playing kickball once, and I remember I ended up, now I know I subluxed it really badly and hyperextended severely. And I likely had tears in my tissue that we just didn't know to look for at the time. Now my knee has really serious injuries, and now my hip has really serious injuries, and all the way up my body, you know, just from that one injury in middle school that we didn't know we needed to address. And so there were things like that that just kind of happened along the way that when I did officially get an Ehlers-Danlos hypermobile type diagnosis in 2017, it explained so many things.
Yeah.
And I knew I had it before the diagnosis. My sister was diagnosed by a neurologist several months before that. And I remember we were sitting in his office, and he's asking my sister these questions. He's asking me certain questions. And then he says, well, I think your family needs to look into Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I think that would explain a lot of things for your entire family, not just you. We Googled it, sitting in his office, still kind of waiting for the receptionist to schedule the next appointment. We just did a quick Google search, and both of us said, we all have this. This is exactly what we have.
Wow.
So we went to the office knowing that at least the 3 siblings and our mom had this. And my sister's kids were showing signs of it, but not as severe. So then that started the journey for the rest of the family getting a diagnosis. And just like so many people with lifelong debilitating illnesses that we're told, your pain is normal, everybody has pain like that, or, you can't actually be that sick, you're too young. Or, you may be sick, but at least you look really beautiful. Yes, thanks. That's because my collagen is defective. That has nothing to do with my, routine or beauty supply. So just like so many other people who go through that journey of life feeling, like there's something they're living with and they don't know what it was, when you finally get that answer, you want to celebrate. And it's really counterintuitive. Nobody celebrate that they have this illness that, even though doctors say it's not progressive, it's not like your collagen gets better over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you're going to face these really serious struggles for the rest of your life, and it's not going to get better. But you just want to celebrate because you know what you're facing. It has a name and it has an explanation. And fortunately for Ehlers-Danlos, there's no treatment really, and there's definitely no cure. But you now have a family that you can find support, find answers, find things that may help relieve some of your symptoms. And so for me, it was extremely eye-opening to even know that such a thing existed. And now I see it around me all the time. I'm constantly looking at people's skin and evaluating it for how, silky and stretchy it is. I'm looking at how far their elbows sublux or hyperextend, and their knees and hips, and I watch the way a person walks, and I can recognize myself in so many people because I've learned, the markers of connective tissue disorder, and I have a good mind for evaluating for it even. So I've met, I don't know how many people now who I've said, I think you need to talk to your doctor about Ehlers-Danlos, or at least, a connective tissue disorder. And it turns out I was right.
Wow.
So I've added a lot of folks to the Ehlers-Danlos family, just knowing what to look for. And it's because I've seen it around me my entire life. We all thought we were normal because we saw it in each other. Turns out we're not normal.
It makes me think you're able to see that, but most people aren't. And one of the hard things with chronic illnesses, chronic pain, those kinds of health issues is that you can't see it. And I think that's what makes it hard for people to figure out how to respond to it, or why people kind of dismiss it or have the kinds of reactions they do, right? Because it's not visible, it's not obvious, and so if it's not their experience, then they just say, "Oh, that doesn't make sense to me. How can that be?"
The thing that I notice more is that it scares people when they learn, that these invisible illnesses exist. And Ehlers-Danlos isn't necessarily invisible. It's just that you know it when you see it, if you know what to look for, but otherwise you don't. But for me, for example, I wear a brace on my hip. I have ring splints I wear on my fingers every day. I'm actually wearing a neck brace most days. So it's not like it's invisible in that way, but it is invisible in that my skin is gorgeous. I'm not missing a limb. My scarring is, under clothes. So, the skin of an Ehlers-Danlos person usually does have stretch marks or what they call atrophic scarring. And I'm lucky in that I haven't had a lot of surgeries, and so I don't have a lot of visible scars. And so my skin isn't flawed. It's not like I have skin pigmentation issues yet or anything like that. Jamila Jamil is an actress who has Ehlers-Danlos. She also has Hashimoto's, she just revealed. So we're kind of like, she talked about having pigmentation issues and scarring, and as an actress, folks have approached her and suggested that she use body makeup to cover those up. And she says, why would I do that? That's my skin. That's what my skin looks like. And so even for someone who is absolutely gorgeous and so famous, you know, even she has those skin issues and we don't really see it. So hers is not invisible, but it's invisible to most people, unfortunately, just because we don't know what to look for. But there are other conditions that come along with Ehlers-Danlos. There's about 24 comorbid conditions that frequently happen. And I think I've got about a half dozen or more of those. And many of them are more invisible, meaning there are no physical signs. And so those are the more difficult to deal with. Like I can put on a brace and folks can ask, oh, what's that for? And then I say, well, I have defective collagen and that means my joints get really messed up. And that makes sense to them. But then, you know, I wear compression pants every day to help with blood circulation because I have dysautonomia as well, which means my autonomic nervous system doesn't work properly. And folks just think that's the style I choose. But then when I say, well, I'm wearing compression pants because of such and such, that just doesn't make any sense to them because it's not something visible. You know, it's not like a joint that goes the wrong way and is all bendy. And so that kind of stuff, I'm really good at explaining, most days, except when I have really bad brain fog and I'm just like, I'm sick, leave me alone. I do try to explain to people because I know there are so many others who look like me and don't have the cognitive ability to put into words what they're experiencing in a way that other folks can really understand, you know, and make it accessible to them. So the whole language around an invisible illness, I really encourage folks to kind of look into that more just because there are so many people with an invisible illness. I mean, diabetes, you know, is an invisible illness. So we talk about it all the time. Cancer is actually invisible. You can't see its effects on the body most of the time, but it's one that's well known. And we've all learned the language of cancer and diabetes, you know, insulin or chemotherapy, things like that, the stages of cancer, the types of diabetes. So we do have the capacity to learn things outside of our own experience. But I do have to say the reaction I get most from people is it's kind of scary to think here's this young, vibrant, young woman who is a go-getter and works too many hours and takes on too many responsibilities. But then all of a sudden, you know, here she is in braces and her entire wardrobe changes overnight and she's sleeping most of the day. She's not able to move half the time. What if that happens to me? And so that fear causes a lot of folks to shut down the ability to really dive in deep and understand what that person is dealing with, what language to talk with that person about what they're dealing with or what they're experiencing. Some of my closest friends say the most ableist things to me. And I'm just like, how do you not hear how that comes across?
Yeah. What are some of those like do's and don'ts, like the things that people have said to you that you just kind of hit yourself in the forehead and think, oh my God, I can't believe that. And, you know, I could totally be one of those people if we were hanging out a lot more or something that would say something along those lines, I'm sure, at some point, right? Because I like to talk a lot, so I'm guaranteed to say something dumb at some point. You know, help educate people who are scared, maybe even to not want to talk to people who, for fear of saying something wrong. What are some of those do's and don'ts or things that people have said that you just can't believe they would say? And maybe some advice on like how do you talk about things without, I don't know, sticking your foot in your mouth?
Well, you're going to. The question is, what do you do once you stick your foot in the mouth? You know, ignore that or do you learn from that? Because we're all going to say the wrong thing at some point or another, whether it's with a person who has a disability or a person of a different race or a person in the LGBT community. And what matters most is that you care to learn and to grow with that person as their life follows a trajectory that's different from yours. That is the most important thing I could say. If you care about someone whose life looks different than yours in whatever way, learn how they want you to talk to them and how they don't want you to talk to them. And when you mess up, ask how you can do it better. And when you do it well, don't congratulate yourself, because it just is like you're just doing it right, you know? You can appreciate yourself, but don't make a big deal out of it. So I'll give a couple examples that I've lived through. When I first started getting very sick, it was in 2012. There was one morning I woke up and could not get out of bed. And I had mono when I was in college, so it felt like that. So I waited a few days, went to get some testing. I didn't have an active case of mono, so then started a journey of trying to figure out, was this just one of my autoimmune conditions freaking out, or was this something new going on? I now know it was a dysautonomia flare. At the time, we didn't even know I had that. But I was sleeping a lot, and I was unable to move very much. And I had developed food allergies, and I wasn't able to really eat anything besides avocados. So living in community here at Koinonia, we share meals together a lot. We were sharing lunches Monday through Friday, dinners Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Sunday evening we have a worship service that has a potluck meal. And so living in a community, not able to share food when that's one of our central activities is really hard. Unfortunately, now my allergies are even more severe, so I can't even walk in the dining hall. So that has been a problem that's just gotten worse in the last 5 years. But when it first started, I was able to eat avocados. There was someone who was doing the meal planning who really wanted us to use fresh and local stuff and stuff that was in season only. We don't grow avocados, and avocados don't grow year round. So they were having a little struggle, the concept of buying avocados at the store in bulk for me. Of course, they weren't thinking of it that way. They were just thinking, you know, why can't we buy something in season? And so it took a while to transition the person from their passion, which is very valid, of buying local, buying fresh, buying in season. It took a transition for that person to stop thinking solely about their passion and to start thinking about including others more so than following their passion. And so after a while, the person came around and started buying avocados in bulk. And I felt very cared for. And that was a success, in my opinion, of a person who transitioned with me on my life in this new trajectory. The other thing that happened at the same time is that when people saw me, they would always ask, how are you? And I got so tired of that question. And not that that is a bad question, but it's like, if you see me and I'm out of bed, that's a good day. I want to constantly be reminded of all my bad days.
When I can imagine people aren't asking you, how are you, the same way they ask other people. They're probably asking, how are you, in like a very earnest voice. Yeah. Like, Amanda, how are you? You know, how are you doing? Like really, really asking you, like in a way that they don't ask other people.
And also it was like I just walked in a building and 5 people are like, oh, Amanda, how are you doing? And I'm like, dude, I just want to sit down and eat like the rest of you. Like, please stop pointing out how different I am. I personally don't like that, but you know, I'm willing to sit down and talk with you, but can I get in the door first? But also it just got to the point where I kept saying, can you just, you know, like maybe when you see me, tell me something really funny, or just tell me what you've been doing lately. I know you care about me and I know you want to know the details of my illness, but it's really hard for me when I'm not stuck in bed to talk only about being stuck in bed. You know, I need different experience, and you can provide that for me. So I had the community just start telling me jokes. They would, you know, store up jokes for when they saw me, and that was a really cool thing.
Yeah, that reminds me. I keep track of you on Facebook. I think it was almost 2 years ago now. I think that you started your hashtags for Humor Year, and every Friday asking people to send you memes. And I wondered if you would share a little bit about using humor to deal with getting through.
Well, my family has always used humor as a defense mechanism and deflection. I think it is a healthy coping mechanism as well, as long as it's not, taking the place of conversations that need to be had or things like that. So we are a funny family, and when we get together, we laugh nonstop. It's our favorite thing to make each other laugh. And so that's just, part of who I am, part of my identity. And I know about myself that I need humor. So that's why I told folks, tell me a joke, just something to help me feel normal and a part of you. I also know that when you're in a really dark place, whether physically or mentally, your brain can play tricks on you. And sometimes you need something to help you center in reality instead of getting stuck in the darkness. So I started my meme day after a particularly rough time, not just for myself, but for so many people in my circle. It was right around 2 years ago. I started the Friday meme day. I started off just getting 50, 70 memes, and now I'm getting almost 400 and 500 every Friday. And people, I'm not kidding you, I've traveled all around the country in the last 2 years, and people that I sometimes don't even know who they are, they're like, oh, I follow you on Facebook, and I live for your Friday meme day. And it's just become like a place of participation of really funny memes or jokes, sometimes extremely inappropriate, but I have a free-for-all rule, so I don't make folks adhere to certain standards, which is also really nice. Yeah. I'm accepting of all styles of humor except racist, homophobic, and, things like that. And then I turned that into a daily meme post, and that's pretty much all I do on my regular Facebook now is share every day. And it's been really fun. I do search for memes and try to think, what do my followers want to see today? What goes really well with what's in the news lately? So, of course, there are tons of memes about the Revolutionary War and how they fought so hard at the airports. And it's been hysterical to watch the various memes that get created. I don't create myself, but I do occasionally when the situation presents. But it's been a way that I can share my own defense mechanism of humor with other people and just kind of pull folks to a lighter and happier place. It doesn't always work, but sometimes, if you could just make one person's day brighter, why not? Isn't the goal of the shared humanity is to help each other along the way? And I find that humor helps me, and I've seen it help other people. And it's super simple to go to Facebook and share a meme.
I recently discovered a new podcast that I'm really enjoying. It's called Everything Happens with Kate Bowler. She's a professor at the Duke Divinity School, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I don't know exactly when in the timeline with this podcast and everything, but it's such a great podcast. It is really funny. There's lots of very touching parts of the podcast as well. But yeah, she talks about making jokes and pulling pranks on staff while she's getting chemotherapy, and just having this, dark humor in the midst of a really difficult situation. And it is important for us to be able. I'm not sure what that is. It seems to me, when you mentioned that you think that people's reaction to you or your illness, not knowing how to talk about it, is being scared, that's like the primary emotion. It seems like the humor in the face of a diagnosis or a tragedy or things that are really hard is the opposite of that, right? It seems like it's the ability to not take ourselves too seriously and laugh almost in the face of horrible things sometimes.
So I don't want to present that as that is the best way to deal with whether it be a cancer or diagnosis, because I do feel like a lot of times we call it inspiration porn. I don't know if you've ever heard of that concept, but it's like you take a person who lives with a disability or any other, what we consider being the other, and you kind of put them on a pedestal because they handle things in a way that we consider appropriate. So you could put me on a pedestal and say, oh, the way you deal with your illness is so beautiful, and the way you use humor is so great, and the way you encourage and support people, it's like the what's not being said is, I wish other people could do it like you do. And the reason that you think that is oftentimes because it makes it easier for you. You know what I mean? Here's this person that's doing this that I find acceptable. Why can't these other people who are like this person, not like me, why can't they do this like this other person does? You know, and no two people are alike. So I deal with things through humor, no better or worse than a person who deals with things through, you know, really deep introspective writing. I'd love to write stuff. I'm a writer, an English major, but with dysautonomia, my brain fog is so bad, meaning it's like my brain has a reset button every 5 minutes and I kind of forget what I was doing or what I was talking about or what I was reading. And so that doesn't lend itself to an atmosphere of academic writing or a deep spiritual reflection. So I play Pokemon and I go on Facebook and connect with people that way because it's short bursts of like attention and I can do that right now, but it's no worse than someone who does things differently, you know?
I was just going to say, it seems like there are different ways to avoid that fear or that feeling of being scared. Some people might just avoid you altogether, like, I don't know how to deal with Amanda because I don't know what to say to her, and so I'm just going to avoid her. And then other people are like, oh, you're so amazing, like I look up to you and you're an inspiration, but both are actually avoiding the harder conversations about, man, your life sucks.
Well,
sometimes.
And that's it. You hit the nail on the head. It's not about avoiding necessarily. It's more your focus is on yourself. What makes you comfortable, what makes you uncomfortable, instead of focusing on the individual in front of you. So I was going to say the issue of people avoiding you altogether, physically avoiding you, it's real. Those of us who have chronic and debilitating issues, whether it be illness, physical or mental or other issues that make us different from people, we find, unfortunately, that we lose most of our friends and our support network when we move into a life of disability or into, you know, the LGBT community knows this very well. How many people have been turned out from their family because they came out to them as gay or trans? You know, it's not a new concept. But we forget that happens to people with chronic illness too. And it's partly because our life is centered around our illness, our body. We have to eat differently. We socialize differently. We're seen as flaky sometimes because we make plans and then can't follow through. And I have to say personally, I've lost touch with people who I consider to be family. You know, they were strong supporters of me. We were in contact weekly. And I haven't heard from them for a year and a half. And it's painful. I mean, people you think have your back and you think are going to walk through life with you. And then when you need them the most, they're not there. You turn around and they're just gone. And thankfully, there's a lot of folks who are willing to fill that void. You know, I have new friends that I met through the Ehlers-Danlos Society, which is really the only international group that's doing research into Ehlers-Danlos treatment. And they also have a support system. And so I met folks through that are basically family to me now, but they don't replace the people I've lost. You know, they're just new people. So that's a really serious issue that those of us with chronic illness talk about is my before friends, as I call it. And then my, we say it differently, my chronic illness friends or my disabled friends. I refer to people with Ehlers-Danlos as my zebras, because the zebra is the mascot for Ehlers-Danlos. And you know that phrase that comes along with that? Do you know how that came about?
No, yeah. Tell me why the zebra is.
So in med school, future doctors are taught, you know, when you're looking up an illness or when you're hearing symptoms of an illness, you know, go with the most common illness, not the most rare illness. And so the phrase that they're told is, when you hear hoofbeat, think horse, not zebra. Have the symptoms of something. Think, you know, it's probably the flu. It's not some rare autoimmune condition. But you actually have the rare autoimmune conditions. We're not the horses. We're the zebras. And so zebra became the mascot of Ehlers-Danlos, and then also some other rare conditions as well. So I call them my zebra friends and my zebras, and we make zebra jokes, and we buy zebra stuff. I have a zebra keychain that I keep my phone on, and it works for me. But other people who are have Ehlers-Danlos don't like the zebra print because it reminds them of their illness. So that, we're really different in what works for supporting us.
Yeah, and that it makes me think. I keep thinking of this quote, and I don't know who said it or where it comes from. I feel like everybody's probably heard it at some point. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. Initially I was thinking of it in terms of this idea of invisible illness and just being kind to people because you don't know. Like, yeah, it seems weird. I don't understand what's going on with this person, but be kind to them. And it works for even for people that ghost you after a diagnosis, right? Who knows what's going on with those people either? And, thank God that you have support and you have your zebra friends to sort of replace the ones that left. But so often, and I am so guilty of this, rush to sort of a judgment of who people are and what they're doing and what their motivations are. All of these, those are all invisible things that we don't know anything about without spending more time getting to know people deeper. And I think that could be maybe a motto for this conversation about engaging people that are dealing with chronic illness or things that you can't see, that you don't immediately know what's going on, is be kind. Start with kindness, and then that's probably a good first step. Humor is the second step.
Yeah, it can be for sure. Not everybody deals with humor and appreciates it the same way. Some folks think you're making light of their illness if you make jokes. So again, it's more about if you care about someone whose life is different than yours, whether it be illness or some other trajectory that they're on, learn how they want you to talk to them and what they want you to say and what they don't want you to say. For me, one of the things that I hear all the time, but you're so beautiful. And I'm like, great, but what the hell does that have to do with me being sick? Like,
yeah, it doesn't make me feel better.
My skin is beautiful because of my illness, not because of me. There's so much wrapped up in American views of feminine beauty and what all that entails. But my response to that is, well, if you could see the inside of me, you would see a different story. Or I say like, well, I wish the inside looked as great as the outside. So I can deal with those kind of irritating phrases. Folks don't mean anything bad by, but I've tried to show like, that phrase is meaningful to you maybe, but it's not to me. And then if they keep using that phrase, I usually try to say something like, my looks really don't have anything to do with how well or not well I'm feeling. So, maybe you could think of something else to say to try to uplift me, because I know that's what you're trying to do. So I kind of created a way to say like, hey, I know that might be meaningful to you, but it's not hitting me the same way you intended. So think about what your intention is and come up with something you can say that actually hits that intention on the head instead of actually creating tension or conflict within me, and then transferring that to whoever's around me. And I found that works every now and then, but it is really hard to try to talk about, those trite phrases that we say, like, how are you? A lot of times folks don't want to know how you are. They just want to hear a pat answer. So even just changing that, like, hey, what have you been up to lately? Or what Netflix shows have you been watching? That stuff can really change the tone of a conversation.
That comment about your appearance, all I can think of is that it's like the worst would you rather question that I would have come up with in like a youth ministry context or something in a church, where it was like, would you rather have beauty for the rest of your life but have horrible chronic pain, or be terribly ugly and really healthy or something? And it's like, that's just the terrible would you rather question to ask
normals,
somebody.
Those who don't have the chronic illness, even normals would answer that really differently, probably depending on the time of day or day of the week or what.
Yeah. we like to wrap up with like 3 questions. We want to share something that we learned, something that we can do, some kind of action step, and then something that we can share, some kind of resource or thing like that. And I've already been trying to take some notes for the show notes, things that I can share, links that I can share with people about our conversation, about Ehlers-Danlos, and that sort of thing. So you can be thinking about your 3 things, and I'll go first so you can have some time to think. Something that I learned, I think, from our conversation or was reminded of was this idea of not knowing what's going on with other people. I think that's kind of, for me, in some ways, it's a central idea of this podcast. I often assume that I understand what's going on with someone else, and I know maybe how they're feeling or what they're thinking or why they did something or why they behave the way they do. And I think one of the central core things that I want to keep communicating is we don't know. Almost 9 times out of 10, we think we understand what's going on with other people, and we really don't. And maybe the number one thing that we can do that I would like to maybe encourage us to do is ask questions. I think asking questions is a kindness, especially when they're asked in a way maybe that isn't expecting a certain answer. That's an open-ended kind of question that has curiosity behind it. That's a kindness to anyone we meet, especially when we don't understand their illness or we don't understand something about them or something that they're going through. Getting better at asking questions that are not "How are you?" but are maybe a little step more thoughtful.
The simplest question is, how can I support you? How can I make you feel loved? When you're sharing life with someone, you want to support them, and sometimes you really don't know what they need in order to be supported. So ask.
Something that I'm sharing today is this podcast with Kate Bowler called Everything Happens. You were talking before about the trite things that people say, and the name of her podcast is Everything Happens, but the graphic scratches out the part that says "for a reason." And I'm sure that's something you've encountered at some point, somebody saying that, your disease is for a reason, and well, God has some sort of reason for that. I appreciate her podcast a lot. So Amanda, what are some things that you learned through our conversation, and some things that we can do and resources you want to
I'm
share
not really
with us?
sure about what I learned because I feel like I talked a lot and I don't remember half of what I said because that's how my brain works these days.
Sure.
But I think I learned probably how to talk better about living as a person with chronic illness to a person who doesn't have chronic illness or that isn't their current experience. I always need more experience in how to translate what my everyday language is to like a normal, as we would call it. Something people can do. One thing that is super, super simple and super helpful is to actually, I tell people, if you don't know what to say or what not to say to a person with chronic illness, just Google it. There are so many articles that exist that say, this may not come across the way you intend it to, or here's a phrase to use with someone who's ill that shows them support or doesn't show them support. So there are so many great resources and websites that if you just Google, they'll come up immediately. But that's one of the things I encourage folks to do is learn the language of how things come across. Same as you should do with those in the LGBT community. There are phrases that are considered extremely homophobic, and you would never want to say them. In the chronic illness community, there are phrases that are ableist and extremely inappropriate, and you would never want to say them. And if you want to learn what some of those are, one is, but you look so good. And there's so many others like that are a little bit, not quite as obvious, I should say. I think I said it when you were talking about yours, ask a person how you can support them. You may find that they want you to do things like help them sweep their porch. That's something I have a really hard time doing. And so there are physical things that you can do for people that show them you love them and want to include them in your life. And of course, I encourage you to love people and include them in your life, regardless what their abilities are. A couple of good resources. One, if you want to learn more about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is often called EDS, the acronym of the name, there's a website, the Ehlers-Danlos Society website is really, really helpful. So if you just Google EDS Society, and they've got all kinds of resources there to learn what is EDS, what are some of the signs of EDS, what are some current treatment of the symptoms of EDS. They've also got some practitioners listed there on their website. And then there's a way to connect to your local folks in your area who would have EDS and more resources that way too. So I suggest that you connect with folks. Obviously, if you have some kind of chronic illness, I have a support system that I've created with folks who have various illnesses, whether mental or physical. And we connect each day with each other and just share a little bit about our life and learn how to love each other through everything we're dealing with. And that really helps to have a tribe of people around you who care about you and share in your daily life.
Yeah, definitely. The work that you're doing through Koinonia is primarily within the Georgia, Sumter County area?
No, not at all. In fact, it's mostly outside. A lot of the work that I do supporting folks is online through social media. I've created some networks, like I was mentioning, of folks who have illness, whether mental or physical. And so the group that I mentor, we use it as a support group, like a traditional support group, but also a humor group. We particularly find joy through humor. And then also we've started doing what we call our daily victory posts, where those who want to share what they consider to be a victory of their day, whether that be getting out of bed, taking a shower, or running 5 miles. And we all envy those who run 5 miles, but we still celebrate with them. So that's the primary way that I support. There is a local state group that I'm connected with, and I help do some admin work for them. But there's not a lot locally in Sumter County to be connected with. I would love to work more with that and create some networks locally, and that's a hope and a goal of the next couple of years as I'm able to do that.
Well, if people want to connect with you online, what's a good way for them to get in touch or to connect
right now,
with you?
I don't have like a website necessarily to connect with me on. That is something coming this year.
If they just need memes,
yeah,
maybe.
If they need memes. Well, there's my Facebook. You can look me up, Amanda Moore. I'm a community member at Koinonia Farm. You can also go to the Koinonia Farm website and send me a message through there. Or you can email me, amanda@koinoniafarm.org, and then we can figure out how to best support each other.
Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me and share your story and things that can help people love the ones in their life better and hopefully create a better connection and support for those in our lives that are going through things we can't see. I really appreciate your time and thanks for all of the wisdom that you've shared that you have learned through your experience.
Thanks for hosting this really important conversation. I think it's something that we as a society need to think more about, how to interact with those who are ill. We need to learn how to deal with that.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast. I hope you found it helpful. If you enjoyed it, please help us spread the word by subscribing, sharing it with your friends, rating and reviewing it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback on the show or future topic ideas. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at WDTAT Podcast or email us at WDTATpodcast@gmail.com. A final thought from Brené Brown. The willingness to show up changes us. It makes us a little braver each time. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?